Hello and welcome everyone to the IXIA NU Nuggets. These are no frills, straight to the point videos for the engineer in a hurry. For those that don't know me, my name is Chris Gabrielson, and this particular video is going to be about using IX load. And this video is going to be useful if you're trying to get an IXIA to simulate genuine TCP connections that have both a three-way handshake as well as a three-way teardown, or if you just want IXIA to simulate a large number of genuine clients that have IP addresses and can ARP for a gateway and send real traffic, this is going to be the video for you. Now, some of the use cases of this, I find it very useful if I ever need to troubleshoot something like creating genuine NAT translations or creating net flow data where I want actual, FTP or HTTP traffic to be sent. This is a great way to do it. Also, if I need a certain volume of traffic, maybe I need a lot of source test IPs so that it hashes over a port channel, or maybe I'm trying to simulate actual kind of user traffic against a QoS policy, this is a great option. And I also have here the very last bullet. Technically, you can also use this to test an actual server as well. It's not specific to networking gear. So if I wanted to test an actual HTTP server, in theory, you can configure IX load to log into that server like a user, pull web pages, click things, etc. That's all possible. So we'll talk about that a little bit, but for the most part, we're really going to be focusing on how to create legitimate traffic. And one of the things I'm starting off with is I have a 9300 here with two IXIA ports. So show run int gig 101, show run int gig 1048, and I want to simulate traffic between these ports. I want client FTP traffic. We're going to use FTP because it's very simple to set up. But I want FTP traffic from these clients to come in on VLAN 10, get routed to VLAN 20, where my server is located, and then essentially we want to get some bidirectional traffic there. And so as it stands, I have nothing on this switch, just base max, couple SVIs for VLAN 10 and 20. Show int VLAN 20, there we go. Show run int VLAN 10. So just a simple 10, 10, 10, 1, as well as 20, 20, 20.1. And so that's what we're going to be using. Now, in order to get started, I'm going to hop over to my IXIA VM, and I'm going to click on IX load. And this is typically going to take a couple seconds to load up. And in the meantime, one of the things I'm going to need is the chassis IP of the ports are going to be connecting to. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that now. We'll use it in just a minute. And while this loads, let's just go ahead and look. I've given a description in my physical interfaces in terms of which ones we care about. So show run int gig 101, show run int gig 1048. Okay, and so right here, IXIA on 11.1 for that chassis is going to be the one I care about, and then 916 will be going to port 148. All right, so now back to our virtual machine here. We start off in this page, the originate, DUT, and terminate. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a traffic profile that will be the originator of our traffic. We're going to assign an IXIA port to that. We're then going to do the same thing for the terminate. That's going to be our FTP server. We'll give it another IXIA port. And the DUT is our switch. That is our device under test. So let's go ahead and look at how this gets started. I'm going to click the originate first. That brings me here. I'm going to right click in the open space and hit add network traffic. Now, right here is where this application likes to freeze. It's always the very first time you click it. Sometimes it takes 30 seconds, sometimes 60. Just give it a minute, and then after that, it'll be very quick. Now, once my network traffic has been created, click on network 1. And down below, it should pull up the network information. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this on VLAN 10. So when I go down below, the address right here, I'm going to change, right now it's 10.10.0.1. I'm going to change it to 10.10.10.2. And I'm going to give it a mask of /24. I'm going to increment it once, and I'm going to have up to 100 clients connected off of this subnet. They're going to use the gateway IP of 10.10.10.1. And my gateway is going to not increment. All 100 clients will use the same gateway. Now you'll notice over here on our ports, these are both configured as mode access. If they were trunks and I needed to impose a .1q tag, over on the far right hand side, if we go through this little scroll bar, we do have the option to make this VLAN enabled and select the VLAN I want. And if I want more than one VLAN, I can increment it a certain number of times. So this would start at VLAN 1, increment one VLAN at a time for 4,094 VLANs. So that's a lot more than I want. Instead, I'm just going to go ahead and just deselect that. But otherwise, if you wanted just VLAN 10, say this was a trunk, you would do 10. This would stay at 1, and your VLAN count would be, this would be 1. So you're essentially saying, I just want, starting at VLAN 10, going only once, I just want this traffic. So, but instead, I'm going to deselect that, because we're not tagged, as I said. And this should be the start of our source traffic. Next, I need to configure the termination. I'm going to do the same thing. Right-click, add network traffic. It's now network 2, nice and fast. I'm going to click on where it says network 2, and I'm going to do the exact same thing for the destination. The difference is I'm only going to configure a single address here. So this address is going to be 20.20.20.2, still a /24, but my count will be just 1. Only a single client here using 20.20.20.1 as the default gateway. And once again, no VLAN stats here, so this will be just straight untagged access. Now I want network 2 to be my FTP server. So I'm going to go mousing over traffic 2 here. I'm going to click the plus arrow, and I can now see the type of traffic I can generate. I could do things like storage. I can create iSCSI and SMB. I can simulate voice traffic, video, data. We can see here all the different data options we have: TFTP, Telnet, SSH, HTTP, lots of different choices. But for now, I'm going to mouse over FTP, and then I'm going to click server. And that should now create an FTP server for me. And if I click this FTP server, I can now choose if I want to modify some of the options. So the default listening port will be port 21. I'm not too concerned about any sort of VLAN priority or having any QoS values associated with this, but if you wanted to modify it, this is where you would do it. And then over on the second tab, here's my server files. IXIA automatically gives you a series of dummy files ranging from 1 byte up to just over 1 million bytes here. That could be either pulled or pushed to the server. If for some reason you were testing an actual traffic, you can add the plus arrow here, and you can specify your own file name and actual file. So if I were to specify the file, I could go to my desktop and select something, and provided it's small enough, there is a size limitation, IXIA will actually FTP your real file for you to a server or client. But for now, I don't care about that. Usually the dummy files are good because, again, we're just creating TCP. We really don't care about the files themselves, so I just deleted that when it was selected. For now, all these default settings should be good on our server, so let's go ahead and do the same thing for the traffic on the client. Mousing over traffic 1, I'm going to click D+, go over to FTP, and select Client. I'm then going to click on the FTP client in the middle, and it brings up what options I have. Now, IXLoad is very powerful in terms of simulating what users can do, and that's what we have here between the start and stop. If I do a plus, I can now see a bit of the options that are available to us. There are more, but at a high level, we have 2 macros, get and put, and then I also have the explicit commands, something like logging in, creating a directory, or sorry, changing directory, making a directory, retrieve, store, etc. So lots of different options here. But one of the other things we want to keep in mind, there's also the ability to do things like loops and think. So if you ever want to play around with IXIA, you can have something where maybe a user logs into the server, thinks for 3 or 4 seconds before doing a change directory, waits a couple more seconds before then creating a directory, navigating to it, and then retrieving or pulling a file. So we can get pretty granular with what we do, but for the most part, we're going to stick with things like get and put. Get, if I double click this, it now adds in get. And if I mouse over it, we could see this is an IX load specific command. It executes login, retrieve, and quit. So this is a macro where it just does all that stuff for you. The client will log in, get a file, exit out, and that's it. That's the end of their interaction. Now, once we select this, we can now put in the options that we want. So the username will be root, password will be no reply at ixiacom.com. We're going to leave those as is, but my destination IP, I'm now going to select the drop down over on the far right hand side and then click my traffic. Watch what happens in the middle in this screen. Boom. Now they're connected. This now tells IXIA that this client will be going through our device under test in order to get to this FTP server. The next thing I want is I want it to pull the largest file available, because maybe I'm going to be simulating a large volume of traffic, not so much actual, maybe numbers of clients or something similar. Now, if for some reason you wanted to modify any settings on the client, you could do that here. So things like FTP active and passive, username, passwords, advanced options, etc. So there are lots of options here as well, but normally it's not necessary for what we want to do, but just be aware it is an option. All right, so at this point, we have our two traffic profiles created. Now we need to tie them to the IXIA ports. And in order to do that, I'm going to select ports from the menu on the left here, if you see my screen. And we've got that chassis chain. So I'm going to add chassis, and I'm going to paste in. Let's see if it worked. Nope. All right, so let's try that again. I am going to add my chassis chain and put in the 172.18.120.46. And this should now connect to my IXIA chassis. And I'm going to be looking for these two ports. So my client on VLAN 10 should be associated to slot 11 port 1. And then my server on VLAN 20 will be slot 9 port 16. All right, so here we are. So we've got card 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I'm going to go to 11 first. So here is 11.1. Now, one thing to note, if for some reason you see a user ID here, maybe someone else is logged into your ports, one of the things you could do is you can right-click this, and you do have the option for clearing ownership. So, and that can also be done over on the right. So what we're going to do is we're going to click on port 11.1. This is going to be my client on VLAN 10. So we can see there's two different traffics here. Traffic 1, network 1, which is our client, and then traffic 2, network 2 is our server. So make sure client is selected, your port is selected, and then migrate it over. And we should see it go under your client. And again, if I right click it, there should be options for things like clearing ownership if someone else has it. If you don't have a name here, that's perfect, because IX load will be taking ownership of this port. So be aware of that. Now that I have my client port, I need to do the server. So that's going to be in card 9 and port 16. So under card 9, port 16 should be the last one. There it is. I'm going to select the server now and migrate it over. And if for some reason you click the wrong thing, just click your port and hit this little back arrow. That'll put the port back in the pool. But for now, I've now mapped my client and server IXIA ports to the client and server traffic profiles within my IXIA. The final step we need to talk about is our timeline and objective. And there's a couple things here, so I'm going to pull this down at first. So because I'm doing FTP traffic, the default behavior for IXIA is to say, oh, well, maybe you're just trying to simulate users. So that's going to be the objective of this test, is we want to simulate 100 users. But maybe for my testing, I just want a lot of TCP traffic. Maybe I'm testing something like NAT translations, and I just need a lot of unique FTP sessions, each one with its own translation. So instead, I'm going to double click simulated users, and that gives me the ability to change it. So I could say something like throughput in megabits per second, and I could say, let's make it 100. From there, I'm now going to pull this back up. Let's see if I could do it. There we go. So now IXIA is going to try and reach 100 megabits per second using any number of clients necessary in order to get that sort of throughput. We then see our timeline here. The default behavior is that we're going to immediately get started, and then the sustain time is how long we're going to try and hit this 100 megabits per second. The default is 20 seconds. That is not a whole lot of time. So instead, let's bump it up to start to at least 5 minutes. I typically recommend an hour, but we'll do this just fairly quick just so you could see a couple of things. So 5 minutes is going to be our sustain time, and we'll see this change once I click down. So now we're going to try to sustain 100 megs per second for 5 minutes. At which point, at the end of 5 minutes, we will then take 20 seconds to gracefully close out any remaining connections. So we'll take 20 seconds to sort of ramp down our traffic. Now, if for some reason I wanted this to run multiple times, I could also modify my iterations. So I could do things like, all right, not only do I want this to run for 5 minutes and then ramp down for 20 seconds, I want to do that cycle 200 times. That's an option within IXIA. But generally speaking, I just want traffic generated. So I usually make my sustain time something really large, right? You can make it like 10 hours and just let it run essentially constantly. Or you could just do multiple cycles like this. All right, so let's review. We created our traffic profiles here. We created an FTP client and FTP server. We have the client logging in and pulling the largest file it can with a get, which is a login, retrieve, and then quit. It's going to this network here, and it should be using our switch, which I'm assuming is properly configured at this point. We're going to try and get to 100 megs per second. We're going to stay there for 5 minutes before then taking 20 seconds to get back down to 0 before cycling through and doing it all over again and repeating that cycle 200 times. When we're ready to get started, we're now going to go up to the top left here, start test, and then test 1. And what you need to pay attention to is this area here where my mouse is. We're going to see a lot of stuff scroll by, and if it fails, it'll just say test is unconfigured. So be aware it can sometimes get hidden. The exact reason in terms of why it fails is easy to get hidden. But this, as we'll see, takes about a minute or two. And then once it's successful, this is what we can see. We'll see it automatically went over. We were in the config window here where my mouse is. We automatically switch over to the statistics view. That's a good sign. It means that everything was properly pushed down to IXIA. IXIA was able to load it and start testing. And now we could start seeing some of the basic statistics views. So right here, simulated users, we could see at 0 seconds, 4 seconds, right at 6 seconds in, we had 1 user come online. And this is a running count for what exactly is going on. The number of sessions and connection rate right now is 0. Just one thing I found, generally speaking, IXIA is kind of sluggish, which is why I recommend we do this test at least 5 minutes. Because what we're going to see here, there we go. So now it took about 38 seconds for any activity to actually start happening. From my client side, if I were to, let's go ahead and get the log a little bit lower now that we don't need it. So my connection rate right here, we're running around 24 connections at this point in time. It dropped to 23. And my transaction rate. So we're pulling 72 files per second on average. And the fact that this blue line is going up on the server means that we are seeing some of that information. If I were to hop over to my switch right now and look at the interface stats, I should see they are now non-zero. So if I look at just up arrow enter, we could see my 30-second rates are beginning to change or at least level out. Let's see. Oh, now they're stopping. There we go. All right, so now they're updating a little bit more. So IXIA does not automatically go straight to our 100 megs per second. And one of the ways I could validate that, there are some other things I could do as well. So like right here, I have L2-3 throughput stats. So if I select this view, it adds a third graph in. I can get rid of the ones I have by just unchecking this box. And I can now see what exactly is going on in terms of our testing. So right here, client bits send rate, client bits received rate. So Clients are receiving a good amount of data. The red is the server bit sent rate because these clients are logging in, they're getting a file, and then they're closing the connection. So this is essentially exactly what I like to see. Lots of activity on the server. I'm hitting my goal of 100 per second, and I could do some of my testing. Now, if you want to expand out with some of the other graphs, you could certainly take a look at some of them. There are quite a few. We can measure everything from just total throughput to connections to things like failed connections. I think there's also some statistics here for just how many connections there are total. So right now there's been just about 1,600 sockets created to download these files. We can measure things like latency, file uploads. So lots of different options here within our statistics reporting. But just be aware, right? It takes usually about 30 to 60 seconds for some sort of activity to happen. Also, while this is running, one thing I will show is if I were to shut no shut in SVI, int VLAN 20 shut no shut. So that should completely break my traffic right now. If I look at show IP ARP, we can see right now it looks like, so in VLAN 10, it's doing this all with a single client. It did not need to use additional clients. But we could see here in this little break how long it took for it to detect and recover. Now, if you're dealing with higher scale, be aware IXIA may not have the ability to immediately go to 100 like this. So I found a lot of times, especially if I'm doing very high volumes of traffic or a large number of unique sockets, in some cases it might take IXIA multiple minutes for it to ramp up. So just keep in mind that when you're looking at your throughput statistics or whatever sort of measurement you're trying to do, be aware even after a couple minutes you don't have what you expect, it still might be an IXIA problem where it just takes a couple minutes for it to ramp. But for now, we'll go ahead and we'll let this continue running. We're almost done. We're at 4 minutes and 28 seconds. So a couple things we can also look at while this is running. There is an analyzer option that will really, actually, you know what, I'm not going to go into that for now. Let's go back to statistics. And I think with this, we don't need to talk about custom views. Let's do this and this. Okay, so here is some of the things I want to highlight. So one of these options, if I go pull this over. So TCP connections, we could see if I close out some of these, so I don't care about latencies or file upload or anything else. And let's get rid of throughput stats. There we go. So if you're looking for a unique number of sockets, this is a great way to do it. So right here, throughout this test, we made 3,124 SYN/X. We did 3,124 fins. So if you're doing something like maybe NAT or NetFlow testing and you want to get a large number, you can adjust that here. Just remember with your tests, you could change some of these, but if you change any of the things that you are testing, so for instance, if I no longer want to do throughput, I want to do connections, you need to stop the test and restart everything. So within your test, you can either stop it explicitly or do a graceful stop. The explicit stop just means it's not going to do any three-way teardowns, anything like that. It just straight up stops traffic. At which point now all of your config, which is this little gear icon here, this should be editable again, and you can modify it and do whatever it is you're trying to do. So if I wanted transactions per second and I wanted to bump this up to 10,000 transactions per second, start my test. We'll see it should be a lot quicker now in terms of how it pushes this down into hardware. We'll still see some of the activity here, and it immediately now, we'll see it was a lot quicker. It goes straight into the statistics view. I'm going to leave these two on there, and hopefully now with a larger number of sockets, we could see a bit of what's going on in terms of IXIA's automatic ramp up. So simulated users here. Right now we're at 1. We're automatically getting some SYN/X. And if we look at stats, so let's look at objectives. Yeah, so if we look at our objectives right now, we could see the transaction rate is around 160 per second. Okay, right there. So at 26 seconds in, that's where now it bumped up to a new value. This is the delay I'm talking about, especially if you have very large scales. Be aware that this exists. IXIA is doing some stuff on the back end, trying to figure out how it can scale up. And we could see our simulated user count was 2, then it went to 3, 4, 8. So IXIA is taking some time to ramp up the user scale in order to hit the number of sockets that we are trying to get. And so right now we could see at the very bottom, client counts going up. So IXIA is going to take some time to try to get our objective. It's not always going to be immediate. Be aware of that. It's a very common mistake. And this is nothing to do with the switch itself. It's simply just a limitation of the application, right? We're putting a lot of load on the CPU to get this much thinking going on. So just be aware of something like this that might exist. All right, well, that's all I had. I hope this particular session was useful. Keep in mind, right, with these higher number of simulated clients, this is also going to be what gives us the ability to do things like this, where now IXIA is simulating multiple different clients. By default, I don't believe we have the option to ping them. We'll double check it. Okay, we can. So I misspoke there, but this is all real clients sending real ARPs, real TCP traffic through the box, showing gig 101, showing gig 101. Really, your only limitation here is just going to be the total throughput on the box itself. So in this case, it looks like we're running right at 750 megs per second, and as a result, we can't get that 10,000 number of transactions. So if I look at my throughput stats here, we're pegged out on the interface, and so that's where IXIA is now. But otherwise, very powerful tool, very neat once you get to use it. Customers, if you get screenshots of this, show them you're testing. They love seeing that level of detail. So I hope you found this tutorial useful. Hope it saves you some time. And thank you, and have a great day.